Hi all, my name is Dhruv Sharma and I welcome you all on a new video on Easy Bytes on how we can set up Cisco routers with TACACS as an authentication mechanism with ICE 2.4 onwards. We already have lots of videos on YouTube and lots of content how we can set up TACACS on Cisco routers with ICE 2.3 or previous versions. But Cisco has changed how we configure CiscoWise 2.4 onwards. So if you know how we can configure CiscoWise with 2.4 version, going forward, the configuration remains same. So I thought to put up a quick video. So here we are. We can configure ICE in very simple steps, but before we get into the implementations, we will quickly look into some technical aspects about what is TACACS and as an authentication algorithm. Then we will see the implementation steps we need to perform on a Cisco router. And later on, we will review the steps we need to perform on CiscoWise. TACACS, which stands for Terminal Access Controller, Access Control System, which uses TCP port 49. It can be used to manage both Cisco router or a switch or even a firewalls. So it is pretty popular. So if you are working in the network domain, I'm sure you must have been very well versed with this algorithm. So unlike Radius, TACACS works to provide authentication and an authorization separately, which means that unlike Radius, when a user is authenticated, automatically it is authorized because authentication and authorization happens at same time. But with TACACS, the authentication and authorization happen separately. So, which means that once the user is authenticated, his each and every command is authorized and it is compared to the predefined policies on CiscoWise. With Radius, only the password which we provide over the NAS client and NAS server, only that is encrypted. But with TACACS, complete end-to-end communication between the NAS client and the NAS server, which is the ICE and the switch or a router or a firewall, everything is encrypted. And I will leave this differences for you to review later on. So we're going to discuss this implementation of setting up TACACS using a random topology from my lab. In this lab, we have a Cisco router, r1.barbie.com, and which has an IP address of 111.132, and CiscoWise, which has an IP of 111.12, and a domain controller, which is already configured on CiscoWise. So we need to ensure that when a user is trying to log in on this router, he will be authenticated and unauthorized using TACACS. Let's jump in. Yay! So first thing first, we're going to look into the router. So in this router, we're going to push some commands to enable it so that and point it towards the TACACS, which is nothing but CiscoWise. We need to ensure that this router is pointing towards 111.12. Before we get up and do the configuration, when we do the configuration, we have to do some prerequisite changes. So we need to ensure that SSH is enabled on your routers, and you have to enable local authentication, which is pretty important. Which is why, because if in case the AAA server is unreachable because of a network outage, you can still communicate and log in into the routers remotely using local credentials. So that's why setting up local credentials is absolutely important. So I've already given you this configuration, which is very much self-explanatory. I expect you guys to understand about what is line VTY, and these are the commands to enable SSH. I won't go into details about SSH and all, so which I expect the audience to know. So finally, setting up the routers, and these are the commands. Oops. Yeah. So first, we need to enable AAA model. So we have to ensure the router is enabled with the feature of AAA, and later on configure and 1111.12, which is the IP address of CiscoWise, now which is acting as TACACS, and that's the key. Yep, and later on I highly recommend everyone to create a group. We create a group for TACACS, and we call it is a name as ICE TACACS. I could have given ICE Dhruv as well. So yeah, but I give a name of ICE TACACS, and I give a name, the server which I created in the previous slide, ICE1, is called in here. The reason why we recommend to use create a group, so that if in case in future you create more ICE instances, you can just add it into this group, and rest of the configuration items doesn't change. So later on, provide authentication and authorization configuration. Authentication, we give a name as VTY, and which is pointing towards ICE and the local. So if in case ICE doesn't work, the local credentials will be used to log in on the routers. And authorization commands, and later on we have to define privilege 1 to 15, use TACACS and local if authenticated. Finally, the accounting configuration. So we have to ensure accounting is configured for all the privileges from 1 to 15. That's pretty standard configuration for AAA. Nice and easy. And finally, the line VTY04, where we are enabling transport input SSH, where we are specifying that the router can be connected over SSH, and the authentication is VTY, which is nothing but the group of TACACS plus local, and authorization VTY, which is TACACS group plus local credentials. Configuration is pretty standard. You can find it over the internet all over the place, but I thought to have it at a single place for you. And finally, set up CiscoWise. CiscoWise can be configured in just 5 simple steps, absolutely 5 simple steps, which is very easy. First, we need to ensure that the device administration service, which is Cisco TACACS as a service, is enabled on CiscoWise as a platform. Once we do that, we have to add a network device, that is router, in CiscoWise, and create authorization profiles, later on command sets, and appropriate profiles or rules. These are very simple 5 steps, and we're going to achieve it now. Step number 1, we're going to go under administration, system deployment, and enable this feature. Once that is done, we have to go under administration, network resources, network device, and add an entry for Cisco router and the shared secret key, Cisco. Finally, create a TACACS authorization profiles. We just create a simple authorization profile, r1.bavi.com, that's the name, and the privileges. Finally, the command sets. We create 2 command sets just for my lab references, but if in case your office, you can create multiple command sets based on the job roles. In my lab, we have a job role known as help desk, where the user only has privileges to run these 2 commands, where the administrators doesn't have any restrictions. We ensure that you click this option very wisely. Last step, where we have to create some authorization profiles, where policy is created to give access of administrators, which are part of a certain AD group, and help desk, which are part of a specific AD group. And finally, we tested where a user known as Neha is trying to log in, and she can't run config terminal command, but she could run show IP route. So this, all this information I basically gathered using this link, which is mentioned on the references. I highly recommend to go through and read this article. And finally, some lab fun. So we went through all these 5 simple steps and some configuration items, which what we did on Cisco Router. So it is now time for us to verify whether this configuration will going to work in lab or not, and I'm sure it will. So let me quickly log in into the Jump server. Okay. Let me bring it over here. That's a full screen. Okay. So that's the Cisco router. So it is currently configured with bare minimum configuration. So if you go back to the slides where we define pre-change configuration on Cisco routers. So we need to ensure that SSH and local authentication is enabled on this device. So I go back. So I can see that this router is already configured with an IP 1111.132, which matches our topology. Oops, sorry. And I can confirm, yeah, I can confirm that this router can connect to CiscoWise, which is 1111.12. So the basic network configuration is already in there. Yeah, but, and I can, let me also verify if I can log in on this Cisco router as a normal SSH using TACACS, using local credentials. So I can verify that I have logged in into the router using my local credentials, which was Dhruv, and which I created using pre-change configuration. But now we have to push these commands on the router so that it can point towards CiscoWise. So I will start pasting all this configuration. And if you have any questions, you can always post any comments and questions over the chat, and you can get the link to the PPT from the description below. Okay. So over here, as you can see, I have enabled AAA new model, which ensures that the router is has now capacity to configure, to allow it to configure in AAA mode, and we have enabled that feature. And now we have to enable authentication parameters. As you can see, I'm pushing all the authorization and authentication commands, which were mentioned on the slides. We have created TACACS, a group where it is pointing towards CiscoWise, and authentication and authorization commands. These are pretty standard commands, nothing fancy. And finally, the accounting. So last, we need to ensure that SSH on line VTY is also pointing towards CiscoWise. Let me, 1 second. Let me push this command again. Okay, so I pasted all these commands of SSH over for the SSH over line VTY04, and it is pushed perfectly fine. So our job over here for setting up the router is successfully configured. Now, finally, we have to go into CiscoWise and configure these 5 simple steps. I'm going to bring my CiscoWise. I go under Administration, System, Deployment. And we have to ensure that this checkbox is clicked and save changes. Although I've already added, but the configuration is pretty simple. We give a name. You can call it any name, but I've given the host name, which is r1.barbie.com, and the IP address of the Cisco router. Oops, not the switch, the router. 111.132, and the key, Cisco. Click Save Changes. That's it, job done. Finally, we'll go under work centers and policy elements. Over here, we're going to create some TACACS profiles, which we're going to use under the policies. We create a profile. And we give privileges 15 and maximum 15. Submit. The TACACS profile is successfully created. And finally, we're going to go under command sets. We will create 2 command sets, one for our help desk agents. In this command sets, we're going to ensure that the help desk agents who are provide some basic, who should have some only basic functionality on the routers, so they should not run any complex commands. So in that case, we can just give show IP route, which is quite simple, and then we can even can allow it to run show running config. Make sure that you don't you specify the full command, not show run conf. So you have to provide the complete command over here. Submit. And finally, we can add a new command set for administrators, which has full privileges. We click submit. And the last step is to go under device admin policy sets. We'll use the default policy sets. Authentication is already configured to use AAA as an authentication mechanism, which is my Active Directory. And under authorization, I will create a new authorization profile. So first, we're going to create a new authorization profile for help desk agents. We're going to go back into conditions, identity groups, external identity groups, and web gateway admins. We use it. Command sets, help desk, and the shell profiles are one. So this is the router and this is the help desk. This is the command sets which are part of an AD group web gateway admins. And I click save. I will create one more profile for administrators. Use, this time administrator, and the command shell profile is R1, and I save. So just to summarize, if a user from AD group networks is trying to log in, he will get a command sets from administrator. That is he will have full privileges for r1.barbie.com. But an help desk agent who is part of an AD group web gateway admins, he will get command sets from help desks, which has limited privileges for r1.barbie.com. Let's try it now. So I will first show you my AD. I have a user Neha, and she's part of AD Group HR and Web Gateway Admin, which is nothing but the help desk. I've removed HR from here and administrators. So currently, user Neha is only part of Web Gateway Admin, and we've called this AD group on the, which is part of help desk. So, and if she tries to log in into the router, she should get a profile for help desk. There is another user, Simon, who is part of networks. So with part of networks, he will get administrative access for r1.barbie.com. Let's try it and verify it. Okay. So now the user Neha is already logged in, and let's see, show IP route. Yeah, she can run it. Show running config. Yeah, she can run it. But now if I try to go into config mode, command authorization failed. Let's go back on the logs. Oops, sorry. I can see that Neha is authorized, but she can't access certain rules. Authorization failed for this command. Nice and easy. On the contrary, if a new user, Simon, is trying to log in, he can go into config mode because he's part of administrator AD group. This was a very small video to help you understand how we can configure TACACS as an authentication and authorization mechanism over Cisco routers. I hope this session was informative, and thank you for joining.